All right, so here we've got Freud as an older gentleman, probably what he looks, in the textbook a little bit more like. This picture is probably a little bit more familiar. And so this was near the end of his life, but here are some things, some basic premises to his theory, and so it's deterministic, which means your past influences the present, or it drives the present, and so how you were raised determines how you're going to live or what you're going to be, those kinds of things. Basically, we also have these motivations or these drives or these instincts that we are either reaching for, wanting, or trying to run from and avoid. And so libido, like we've got life, creativity, pleasure, those things are good, we're moving toward them. Phantos, which is like a death instinct or intense pain, death, as is mentioned in the slide here, aggression, destruction, so we're wanting to avoid those things. This third point is the really, really, really important one. And we'll touch on it a little bit later as well, but the mind is split. There's a conscious and an unconscious side to the mind. Some people call it, sometimes that's written as subconscious, so conscious and subconscious. But really the important thing at this point is just to realize that that your mind is made up of two different parts. As I mentioned earlier, this is the foundation for other theories, either for or against. And the whole theory, all of psychoanalysis, focuses on these unconscious yearnings, these motivations, these instincts, how they drive behavior, how they make us who we are. All right, so personality. Freud's theory, psychoanalysis, is very strongly a theory about personality development, as well as psychosexual stages, and we're going to touch on the personality side here. So this can get a little hard, a little heavy here. This can get a little hard to follow, but I'll give it a shot here, and hopefully it'll help. And so we've all heard of the id, the ego, and the superego, and so we're going to break those down as we go further. But before we get there, just kind of big pictures. And so hopefully the piping here is kind of symbolic of hydraulics. And so hydraulics are how a big backhoe can reach down, grab a big chunk of dirt, lift it up out of the ground, and dump it. It's how fluid is used to lift, to move, to propel, those kinds of things. Well, that's a little bit like what's going on in personality. So we've got these, the piping is sort of to be symbolic of fluid moving through the pipes, all right? So instincts, as I mentioned, are central to this theory. We've got these drives, all right? And so these drives that we have are fluid in the tubes. They're fluid in the pipes. And then tension and anxiety results if that fluid is not moved through the pipes, if it's not regulated, if it doesn't have always room to expand and contract, those kinds of things. So said differently with this pipe metaphor, if the pipe would burst, it would blow and it would begin to spill out. So personality development depends on how good or bad that regulation of fluid is. And so that's what personality is. So what develops the ego and superego is a response to this tension, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about this. I like to come at things in a couple of different ways, some of these concepts in a couple of different ways, and maybe one will connect for you. All right, so personality structures. I love dogs, and anytime I can weave a dog into a presentation, I'm going to. I've got 3 dachshunds, and I just love dachshunds. No matter how bad your day is, you come home, you see those tiny little legs, that big long body. It's just hilarious, and it lifts my spirits every time. But, we got a dog here, and he's wearing the horns, the devil horns. All right, so devil horns are the id. That is the original system of personality. That's the biological part. So at birth, we're entirely id. It never matures. It stays kind of the spoiled brat of personality. It's the source of our basic drives. Operates on the pleasure principle. It feels good, I want it. I want more of it, those kinds of things. It's unconscious, it's immoral, it's illogical, there's no reasoning with it. It's just sort of out of control and self-serving. Superego, so over here we've got this nice puppy here with his little halo and wings, and he's the good dog. So the superego is the law, or the fuzz, kind of, as I call it. And so, by the way, I have 5 years of law enforcement in my background, so I can call cops the fuzz, and so I can get away with that one. So superego, the law, the social part of personality. So it has these internalized social rules. You got morality. And so it is what society says we need to do. It is, the superego is trying to limit the id, it's trying to set boundaries on it, keep it under control. Adds additional demands or tension. So if the id says one thing, the superego says the opposite. So we've got the id operating on the pleasure principle. Well, now the superego is operating on the perfection principle. It's perfection that it's after. So it develops last. Begins to develop sometime around age 2 to 3. The ego. So the ego is the mediator. It's the balancing of the two. Because if there wasn't something to act as a balance, that scale would just slam to the left, slam to the right, slam to the left, slam to the right. Well, so the ego really is the psychological part of personality. So it balances these, balances the pressures of the id with the superego and the reality of the world. So this is the reality principle here. This is set by about 6 years old. But when anxiety and tension exceeds what this ego can manage, defense mechanisms come up. And if you want, you can look at some of all the different kind of defense mechanisms. Some are kind of interesting. Some I think are somewhat accurate. Others are not. But that's when we get these defense mechanisms, and you've probably heard of that. So the ego is not always and forever going to be able to perfectly balance this. It's just not possible. And so that's okay. There can be times where the scale slams to the right or to the left, but most often the ego can balance those two out. Now it's going to be problematic. Where the problems come, and when I say problems, I mean psychological problems come, is that it's always happening. You know, the tension and the anxiety is way too much, too often for it to handle, and that's when you get psychological problems coming. Okay, so I call this the topography of the mind, and so this is really that unconscious and conscious, all right? And so I like this one because it says, you know, the ego and the id and the superego, all of that. But the main things I really like about it are conscious at the top, unconscious at the bottom. And so if you'll see here, a lot of times this also looks like a iceberg. And so, you know, there's just a little bit of the iceberg setting up top, a lot down underneath the surface. And so, so this is one of the things that I think psychoanalysis has right, is that there's way more going on behind the scenes, under the surface, than there ever is shown to others.